Hi all. Welcome to IBDC. Here is the guide for nucleotide data submission at Indian Nucleotide Data Archive, INDA. Indian Nucleotide Data Archive is a portal at IBDC which accepts various formats of nucleotide data submission. There are three types of nucleotide data submission options available at the Indian Nucleotide Data Archive. NGS raw data submission, assembly data submission, annotated sequence data submission. This guide provides an overview of data submission process at the Indian Nucleotide Data Archive. Before starting data submission, user must register at Indian Nucleotide Data Archive. The email should be unique for the registration. Duplicate registrations will not be considered. All the mandatory fields like first name, last name, center name, laboratory name, country, state, and address have to be filled, and the password should be provided in the given required format. Once all the fields are entered and submitted by clicking on Register Yourself tab, you will receive a unique IBDC user registration number. The email and password given during the registration should be used to log in for data submission. After login, the user can see a dashboard that shows the statistics of data submitted. Number of studies registered, number of samples registered, number of experiments registered, number of sequences submitted, and the number of pending experiments with no data uploaded. Below the statistics are the flow diagrams for different types of submissions, and on the left side of the dashboard, there are links for the steps based on the type of submission. Data submission. Let's start with the data submission. In general, the data submission to INDA is as per the formats accepted by the International Nucleotide Sequence Data Consortium or INSDC. Different type of nucleotide datasets need to be appended with suitable metadata to ensure discoverability and appropriate interpretation. Thus, all submissions must include various data metadata groups such as study, sample, experiment, run, assembly, and annotated sequences. A study is defined as an entity that helps in grouping the different types of data submitted to the data archive and controls its date of release. The sample has information regarding the sequenced source of the material. An experiment is an object which contains all the information regarding a sequencing experiment, while run is the actual NGS raw data file. IBDC and INSDC accessions will be simultaneously provided for the study, sample, experiment, run, assembly, and annotated sequence submissions. For NGS data submission, the main components to be registered are study, sample, and experiment. Users can upload raw data generated from transcriptomic and genomic experiments in FASTQ, BAM, or in CRAM file format. For assembly submission, study, sample, experiment, and assembly files have to be submitted. Assembly using already submitted INSDC accessions for raw data can also be submitted. Contig, scaffold, and chromosome level assemblies can be submitted. The file types in the assembly submission are FASTA file, AGP file, GFF3, chromosome list, and EMBL flat file. A study, the DNA sequence in FASTA format, and the relevant annotations need to be submitted. For annotated DNA sequence submission like rRNAs, mRNAs, ncRNAs, and many other types of sequences. Let's register a study. The study can be registered by clicking on the link Register Study. Once the link is clicked, the fields required are shown as a form. The date of release can be given for a maximum of 2 years from the date of submission. You can choose study type from the drop-down and fill in other fields like study title, a short description, and an abstract. PubMed ID of the published article related to the data, and a description tag can be given. The functional annotation option can be chosen only if submitting an assembly. If the functional annotation is selected, the user has to submit a locus tag prefix. The locus tag prefix starts with a letter between 3 and 12 characters long in the uppercase and contains only alphanumeric characters and no symbols such as underscore star. Once the locus tag prefix is validated from INDA, the user will be informed, and after that user can continue with the further submission process. Once the study is registered, you will get a success message which has some basic details and an IBDC study accession. Sample registration. Sample comprises information regarding the sequenced source. Samples are associated with a group of lists that define the various parameters of the sample known as checklists. The parameters in the checklists will help in annotating the sample. The registered samples are associated with an organism. There are 4 types of sample groups to choose from. Users can select only one type of sample per instance of registration. Here we select the virus pathogen checklist. Once the checklist is selected, a page with sample field groups will appear, and the groups with mandatory fields will be selected by default. If the user wants to add more details to the sample, other optional fields can be selected by ticking the box. Once all the fields are finalized, the user has to click on the Next button. On the sample registration page, the first step is to select the study to which the sample has to be mapped. Other mandatory basic details have to be filled in, and organism details, the correct spelling of the organism's scientific name as per NCBI taxonomy has to be given, and the button to find taxon ID has to be clicked. The taxon will be autofilled if the scientific name is correct. The fields can be filled or selected from the drop-down based on their type. Hovering over the question mark icon with a question mark will show the description of fields. Once all the details are given in the correct format, sample details can be saved. Once details are saved successfully, a success message will be displayed and options for the submission of an experiment will be shown. Experiment submission. Experiment submission can be done in 2 ways. The first way of submitting the experiment is to register the metadata and upload the data using the web page. In this method, the user has to click on the link which says Upload through the web. Once the link is clicked, on the next page select the file type to be uploaded for the experiment. On the experiment submission page, first select the sample for which the experiment has to be submitted. Fill in all the details like experiment name, instrument model, library selection, library strategy, library layout, file name, and a valid MD5 checksum of the file to be uploaded. Once all the details are filled, click on Save Experiment Details. The metadata will be saved. On the next page, the file should be selected for upload. Make sure that the file selected should be of the same file name given in the metadata. MD5 checksum of the file should also match with the given MD5 checksum. If you don't want to upload the file at the same time, you can go back to the user dashboard and click on Incomplete Reads and select the appropriate experiment and upload the file. The second way of submitting the experiment is to register the metadata and upload the data using the FTP method. In this method, the user has to click on the link which says Register and upload via FTP. Once the link is clicked, on the next page select the file type to be uploaded for the experiment. On the experiment submission page, first select the sample for which the experiment has to be submitted and fill in all the details. Once all the details are filled, Click on Save Experiment Details. The metadata will be saved. On the next page, the FTP submission details will be given. Use any FTP third-party tools like FileZilla or CyberDuck to upload the data. MD5 checksum of the files uploaded on FTP location should match with the given MD5 checksum. Files have to be uploaded in the corresponding study, sample, and experiment subfolder as shown. Once the files are uploaded on the FTP drive, click on the link which says Map Uploaded Files, FTP Files, and select experiment in which file has to be mapped and validated. Once the mapping is done, the file is further sent for validation. Once the validation is done, IBDC and INSDC accession will be sent to the user. Assembly submission can be done by clicking on the link Submit Assembly, and it is mandatory to have INSDC accession of run before submitting assembly. On the submission page, first, the user has to select the type of assembly submission, level of assembly, whether providing annotation or not, and last, the study to which assembly has to be linked. After clicking on Next, in the assembly submission form, the user has to select the sample to which the assembly has to be mapped. Fill in all other details as text or select from drop-down based on their type. Once fields are filled, the user has to give the file name details of the assembly files to be uploaded. Lastly, the user has to give valid INSDC run IDs of raw data for the valid submission. After clicking on Save Assembly Details, the user will be asked to upload the files as given in the form. After uploading all the files, the user will receive a success message of submission. INDA and INSDC accession of the assembly will be provided only after validation. Annotated sequence submission. Annotated sequence submission is linked with a study registered. The sequence type to be registered is associated with a checklist. The parameters in the checklists will help in annotating the sequence with metadata. The registered sequence is associated with a single organism. There are different types of sequence groups to choose from. Users can select only one type of sequence per instance of registration. Here we select the single CDS-mRNA checklist. Once the checklist is selected, a page with sequence field groups will appear, and the groups with mandatory fields will be selected by default. If the user wants to add more details to the sequence, other optional fields can be selected by ticking the box. Once all the fields are finalized, the user has to click on the Next button. On the sequence registration page, the first step is to select the study to which the sequence has to be mapped. Other mandatory basic details have to be filled in, and organism details, the correct spelling of the organism's scientific name as per NCBI taxonomy has to be given, and the button to find taxon ID has to be clicked. The taxon will be autofilled if the scientific name is correct. The fields can be filled or selected from the drop-down based on their type. Hovering over the question mark icon with a question mark will show the description of fields. Once all the details are given in the correct format, sequence details can be saved, and on the next page, the sequence FASTA file with the same name as given should be uploaded. Once the file is uploaded, a success message is displayed with INDA ID and other submission details. The INSDC ID will be provided after validation. Data browse at INDA. The submitted data, which is in the public domain, can be browsed at INDA by clicking the link Browse Data on the home page of INDA. In the Browse Data page, a table with submitted data that has been made public is shown. By clicking on the INDA accession in the first column, a detailed page of submitted entries is displayed. The page consists of INDA and INSDC accessions on the top, the date of release, data type, title, and organism name. Details like center name, number of bases, size of files, number of samples, and number of runs are given. At the end of the page, a study design is shown as a network diagram, which shows the relationship between the registered study, sample, experiment, and runs. When clicked on the count of sample or runs, details of sample with INDA and INSDC accessions are shown. It has also the link of runs submitted to the sample. The submission of metadata and data need not be completed in a single session. Users can complete the submission at their ease. Accessions will be given only after the submission of data. Submitting just the metadata is not considered as a complete submission. After the validation of data, an email will be sent to the user with all the accessions. Thank you.
धन्यवाद।